The gavel slammed, a gunshot in the silent courtroom, as Judge Harold Vance sneered down from his bench. "You people always think you can talk your way out," he spat, his voice dripping with venom, eyes locked on Marcus Ellis, a black man standing tall in a faded suit. The words hung like smoke, choking the air with their weight. Marcus's jaw tightened, his pulse hammering in his ears. He wasn't just a defendant today, was a symbol, a target, a man forced to carry the weight of centuries in a single moment. The courtroom, packed with tense onlookers, felt like a powder keg, every whisper and glance a spark waiting to ignite. 7 minutes from now, the world would flip upside down, but Marcus didn't know that yet. All he knew was the sting of those words, "you people," and the fire they lit inside him. The case was simple on paper, a minor traffic violation, a ticket Marcus had fought because the stop reeked of profiling. He'd been pulled over for swerving, though his car's dashcam showed no such thing. Now, here he was, facing a judge whose reputation for bias was whispered about in every barbershop and community center in town. Vance's smirk was a blade, cutting deeper with every syllable. "You think you're clever, don't you, boy?" he said, leaning forward, his tone a mix of mockery and menace. The word "boy" landed like a slap, and the crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. Marcus stood straighter, his hands clasped to keep them from shaking. He was 32, a mechanic with a small shop, a father to a 6-year-old girl who thought he hung the stars. He wasn't here to beg or bow, was here to fight, even if the deck was stacked. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady despite the storm inside, "I'm just asking for fairness. The evidence shows I didn't swerve. The officer's report doesn't add up." His words were calm, measured, but they carried the weight of a man who'd spent his life proving he belonged. Vance chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Evidence? You think your little camera trumps an officer's word? This is my courtroom, son." The crowd stirred, murmurs rippling like waves. A woman in the back row, her face lined with years of seeing too much, gripped her purse tighter. A young man in a hoodie scribbled furiously in a notebook, his pen scratching like it could carve out justice. Marcus felt their eyes on him, their hopes, their anger. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. The prosecutor, a nervous man named Carter, shuffled papers, avoiding Marcus's gaze. He knew the case was flimsy, everyone did, but Vance's presence loomed like a storm cloud, daring anyone to challenge him. "Your Honor," Carter began, hesitating, "the defendant's dashcam does show a consistent lane position. Perhaps we could—" Vance cut him off with a wave. "Enough. I've heard enough. Guilty. $500 and 30 days community service." The gavel slammed again, final, unyielding. Marcus's heart sank, but his face stayed stone. He wouldn't give Vance the satisfaction of seeing him break. The crowd erupted in whispers, some outraged, some resigned. A woman muttered, "Same old story," loud enough for the bailiff to shoot her a look. Marcus's lawyer, a public defender named Sarah, leaned close. "We'll appeal," she whispered. "This isn't over." But Marcus barely heard her. His mind was on his daughter, Lila, waiting at home, asking why Daddy had to go to court for driving to work. As the bailiff moved to escort Marcus out, the courtroom doors swung open with a bang. Heads turned. A man strode in, his presence commanding, his uniform crisp, a sheriff's deputy, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His name tag read Ellis. Marcus froze. It was his older brother, James, a deputy for 10 years, a man who'd sworn to uphold justice even when it felt like justice didn't want him. James's eyes locked on Marcus, a silent promise passing between them. Then he turned to the bench. "Judge Vance," James said, his voice like steel, "you're under arrest." The room went deathly silent, as if the world had stopped spinning. Vance's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion, then fear. "What is this nonsense?" he barked, rising from his chair. James stepped forward, handcuffs glinting in his hand. "Bribery and corruption. We've got evidence, wiretaps, bank records. You've been taking payouts to swing cases. Step down, sir. The crowd exploded, gasps and shouts filling the air. Marcus stood rooted, his breath caught in his chest. 7 minutes ago, he'd been a man on trial, mocked and dismissed. Now, his brother was cuffing the judge who tried to break him. Vance's face turned red, then pale, as James read him his rights. This is outrageous. Vance sputtered, but his voice lacked its earlier venom. The bailiff hesitated, unsure whose side to take. Sarah, Marcus's lawyer, stood wide-eyed, her files forgotten on the table. James's gaze flicked to Marcus, a small nod that said everything, "I've got you." Marcus felt something crack open inside him, not relief, not yet, but a spark of hope. The courtroom was chaos now, people standing, shouting, phones out recording. The woman in the back row was crying, her hands pressed to her face. The young man in the hoodie was still writing, his pen flying. Marcus caught his eye, and the man gave a small, fierce nod, as if to say, "We're witnessing history." As James led Vance toward the door, the judge's protests growing weaker, Marcus felt the weight of the moment settle on him. This wasn't just about him or Vance, it was about every person who'd ever stood in a courtroom and felt the system's boot on their neck. It was about his daughter, who'd grow up knowing her father didn't bow. It was about his brother, who'd spent years navigating a world that tried to tell him he didn't belong in that uniform. The doors closed behind Vance, and the room began to quiet. Marcus's heart was still racing, but he felt lighter, like he could breathe again. Sarah touched his arm. "You're free to go," she said, a small smile breaking through. "The fine's voided. We'll make sure of it." Marcus nodded, but his eyes were on the crowd, on the faces that looked like his, on the ones that didn't, all united in this moment of impossible justice. He stepped outside into the blinding sunlight, James waiting by the courthouse steps. "You okay?" James asked, his voice soft now, the deputy gone, just the brother left. Marcus exhaled, long and slow. "I will be," he said. They stood there, two black men in a world that had tried to break them, but hadn't. Not today. The story wasn't over. The appeal would come, the headlines, the fallout. Vance's arrest would spark protests, debates, maybe even change. But for now, Marcus walked down the steps, his head high, his brother at his side. He thought of Lila, waiting at home, and the promise he'd made to her, "Daddy's coming back." And he was stronger than ever. The town of Fairview hadn't seen a day like this in years. By evening, the story was spreading in social media, in barbershops, at dinner tables. Marcus Ellis, the mechanic who'd stood up to a corrupt judge. James Ellis, the deputy who'd brought him down. People didn't just talk about the arrest, they talked about the look in Marcus's eyes, the way he'd held his ground. They talked about the handwritten note someone had found pinned to the judge's bench, now circulating online, "Justice bends, but never breaks." Marcus didn't go straight home. He stopped by his shop, the familiar smell of oil and metal grounding him. His hands moved on instinct, tightening a bolt on a car he'd been fixing for a neighbor. The work was simple, honest, a reminder that he was more than a defendant, more than a headline. He was a man who fixed things, cars, lives, maybe even a piece of the world. James joined him later, still in his uniform, the weight of the day etched into his face. "You didn't have to do that," Marcus said, not looking up from the engine. James shrugged. "Had to. Not just for you. For all of us." They didn't need to say more. They'd grown up in Fairview, knew its streets, its secrets, its scars. They'd seen friends profiled, families broken, dreams deferred. Today wasn't a fix for all that, but it was a start. The next morning, Marcus woke to Lila's voice, her small hands tugging at his sleeve. "Daddy, are you a hero?" she asked, her eyes wide. He laughed, pulling her close. "No, baby. Just a man trying to do right." But as he looked at her, he felt the truth of it, doing right was heroic enough. The appeal process began swiftly. Sarah, relentless now, dug into Vance's history, uncovering a trail of biased rulings stretching back years. The dashcam footage became a rallying cry, played on local news, shared across X. Community organizers rallied outside the courthouse, their signs bold, "Justice for Marcus. Justice for all." The young man in the hoodie, a blogger named Malik, published a piece that went viral, titled, "7 Minutes That Shook Fairview." He quoted Marcus's words in court, framing them as a call to action, "I'm just asking for fairness." James faced his own battles. Some colleagues at the sheriff's department gave him the cold shoulder, whispering about loyalty. But others more than he expected slapped his shoulder, said they were proud. The evidence against Vance was ironclad, recordings of him laughing about keeping the streets clean, bank transfers tied to local developers who wanted certain cases buried. The trial date was set, and James would testify. He didn't relish it, but he didn't flinch either. Marcus started getting calls, reporters, activists, even a lawyer from a civil rights group offering to take his case national. He wasn't sure he wanted that. Fame felt like a trap, a way to twist his story into something it wasn't. He just wanted to fix cars, raise his daughter, live without looking over his shoulder. But he couldn't ignore the fire in his chest, the need to keep pushing. Not just for himself, but for Lila, for James, for every face in that courtroom who'd seen themselves in him. One evening, Marcus and James sat on their mother's porch, the air thick with summer heat. Their mom, a retired nurse who'd raised them alone, brought out iced tea and sat between them. "You boys did good," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But don't stop now. World's watching." Marcus nodded, staring out at the street where they'd played as kids, where they'd learned what it meant to be black in Fairview. He felt the weight of her words, the weight of history, but also the strength of it. They weren't alone anymore. The story of Marcus and James spread beyond Fairview, a spark that caught fire. People saw it as more than a courtroom drama. It was a mirror, reflecting their own fights, their own hopes. Marcus didn't feel like a hero, but he didn't need to. He was a man who'd stood up, and in doing so, reminded others they could too. The note on the gavel, now framed in his shop, was a reminder, justice bends, but with enough hands, it holds. The days following Judge Vance's arrest were a whirlwind. Fairview buzzed with a restless energy, as if the town itself was waking from a long sleep. Marcus Ellis, once just a mechanic with a small shop, became a reluctant symbol. His face appeared on local news, his dashcam footage dissected on talk shows, his words in court, "I'm just asking for fairness," printed on protest signs. He didn't want the spotlight, but it found him anyway, like sunlight breaking through a storm. Marcus tried to keep life normal. He drove Lila to school each morning, her chatter about crayons and recess a tether to the world he knew. But even there, change followed him. Parents stopped him in the parking lot, some to shake his hand, others to ask quiet questions about what happened in court. "You really take down that judge?" one father asked, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. Marcus just nodded, unsure how to explain that it wasn't him. Allenite was James, Sarah, the crowd, the truth itself. At the shop, customers lingered longer, their conversations drifting from oil changes to justice. An older black woman, Miss Clara, who'd been bringing her beat-up sedan to Marcus for years, set a plate of homemade cornbread on his counter. "You keep going, baby," she said, her eyes sharp. "Folks like that judge, they don't stop unless you make M." Marcus smiled, but her words stuck like burrs. He wasn't sure he wanted to be the one making anyone stofy, just wanted to live. James, meanwhile, navigated his own storm. The sheriff's department was a minefield now. Some deputies saw him as a hero, others as a traitor who'd aired dirty laundry. At roll call, a veteran officer muttered, "You really think you fixed anything, Ellis?" James didn't flinch. "I did my job," he said, his voice steady. He'd spent a decade in that uniform, earning every stripe, every scar. He wasn't about to let whispers undo him. The evidence against Vance piled higher. Sarah, Marcus's lawyer, worked late nights, her desk buried in files. She uncovered a network of payoffs developers, local officials, even a few cops who'd kept Vance's courtroom a machine of control. Cases like Marcus's weren't accidents, they were part of a pattern, a system that favored the connected and crushed the rest. Sarah's findings hit the news, and Fairview streets filled with protesters, their chants echoing past the courthouse, "No justice, no peace." Marcus avoided the protests at first. He didn't trust crowds, didn't like the way they could twist a man's story into a slogan. But Lila changed his mind. One evening, as he tucked her into bed, she asked, "Daddy, why do people keep saying your name on TV?" He hesitated, then told her the truth, as simple as he could, because Daddy stood up when someone tried to push him down. Her eyes lit up. "Can I stand up too?" she asked. The next day, Marcus took her to a rally, her small hand in his, her homemade sign wobbling, "Be fair." The rally was peaceful but electric, hundreds of voices blending black, white, young, old. Marcus saw Malik, the blogger from the courtroom, weaving through the crowd, his notebook still in hand. "You're changing things, man," Malik said, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "This town's been asleep too long." Marcus didn't feel like a changemaker, but seeing Lila wave her sign, he wondered if maybe he was. Vance's trial loomed, set for a month later. The judge was out on bail, holed up in his mansion, but the town had already judged him. His face was on every X-post, every newsstand, a symbol of a system that had bent too far. James was called to testify, and he prepared with the same quiet focus he brought to everything. Marcus watched his brother, marveling at his calm. "You scared?" he asked one night over beers at their mom's house. James shook his head. "Not of the truth," he said. "Only of what happens if we don't tell it." The brothers grew closer through it all, their bond a lifeline. They'd always been tight, but the years had pulled them in different directions, Marcus with his shop, James with his badge. Now, they were united, two sides of the same fight. Their mother watched them with pride, though worry creased her face. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest," she said one Sunday after church. "Just make sure you don't get stung." Marcus hugged her, promising they'd be careful, but he knew the truth, some fights were worth the sting. Sarah's work paid off. The state launched an investigation into Fairview's court system, auditing years of rulings. Marcus's case was officially thrown out, the fine and community service erased. It felt like a victory, but a small one. He still saw the same cops patrolling his neighborhood, the same distrust in their eyes. He still heard whispers at the gas station, folks saying Vance was just one man, that the system was bigger than him. Marcus knew they were right, but he also knew something else: one man could start a crack in that system, and cracks could spread. The community began to shift. A local church started a fund to help people fight unfair tickets, inspired by Marcus's dashcam. Malik's blog grew, his posts shared thousands of times, calling for reforms. Even Carter, the prosecutor, reached out to Sarah, quietly offering to help with the case against Vance. "I should have spoken up sooner," he admitted, his voice heavy. Sarah didn't sugarcoat it. "Yeah, you should have." But she took his help, knowing every ally mattered. Marcus started speaking at community meetings, urged on by Lila's relentless enthusiasm. He wasn't a natural speaker, his words halting at first, but they carried weight because they were real. He talked about the courtroom, about Vance's sneer, about the note on the gavel that someone still unknown had left behind. "Justice bends," he'd say, pausing to let it sink in, "but we can hold it up together." People listened, nodded, clapped. Some cried. Marcus felt their hope, their anger, and it fueled him. One night, a stranger approached him after a meeting. A white man, middle-aged, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "I was in that courtroom," he said, voice low. "I didn't say anything when Vance spoke to you like that. I'm sorry." Marcus studied him, saw the shame in his eyes. Say something next time, Marcus said, not unkindly. The man nodded, and Marcus felt a flicker of something new, maybe not trust, but possibility. Vance's trial arrived, and Fairview held its breath. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. James took the stand, his uniform crisp, his voice steady as he detailed the evidence: wiretaps, bank records, Vance's own words bragging about his power. The defense tried to paint James as biased, a brother out for revenge, but the evidence was too strong. Marcus sat in the gallery, Lila on his lap, watching his brother dismantle a man who'd thought himself untouchable. When the guilty verdict came, the room erupted. Cheers, tears, fists raised. Vance's head bowed, his arrogance gone. Marcus felt no joy, only a quiet relief. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was real today. Lila tugged his sleeve. "Is that the bad man, Daddy?" she whispered. Marcus kissed her forehead. "He's just a man, baby. And he's answering for what he did." The aftermath was messy but hopeful. Vance was sentenced to 7 years, his career ruined. The state expanded its investigation, and 2 more judges stepped down under scrutiny. Fairview's mayor, pressured by protests, promised reforms: body cams for cops, civilian oversight boards. Marcus didn't trust promises, but he saw people trying, and that was something. He and James kept moving forward. Marcus expanded his shop, hiring a young black mechanic who'd been inspired by his story. James was promoted, though he downplayed it, saying it was just paperwork. Their mother threw a party, the house filled with laughter, music, and neighbors who'd become family through the fight. Miss Clara brought her cornbread, and Malik showed up with a printed copy of his latest post, titled, "The Ellis Brothers, Fairview's Turning Point." As the months passed, Marcus's life settled, but it was different now. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was a voice, a man who'd stood in the fire and walked out stronger. Lila started drawing pictures of her dad and uncle, superheroes in her eyes. Marcus framed one, hanging it next to the note from the gavel, now a relic in his shop. "Justice bends, but never breaks," it read, and he believed it more each day. The story of Fairview spread, a spark that lit other towns, other fights. Marcus got letters from strangers, some thanking him, others asking for advice. He answered every one, his words simple but true: keep standing. Keep speaking. You're not alone. He didn't have all the answers, but he had hope, and that was enough. What's right, what's wrong, what's just? Share your thoughts because the fight for fairness belongs to us all.